again. So, a formal welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for signing up for this Pax Christi Scotland venture, which is going to stretch over the next 7 months. The book, Advising Non-Violence and a Just Peace in the Church and the World, which is quite a mouthful, is a Pax Christi international venture. And I was pleased to have co-editor Judy Coode explain in our last newsletter the process of getting the book together. If you haven't read that, here's a plug. You'll find the newsletter on our website, www.paxchristyscotland.org. But I'm more than pleased that Anna Blackman, lecturer in Catholic religious education at Glasgow University, is leading us in this venture. So many of Anna's publications have focused on non-violence, including Inhabiting the Kingdom, Theologies of Non-Violence in the Catholic Worker Movement, published this year. So I don't want to take up her time. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat so that later we can have a discussion, and Anna will be asking questions and making breakout rooms and so on. But in the meantime, I'd like to begin with a prayer, and who better to turn to for help with that than Pope Francis, who has said, may it be charity and non-violence that guide the world and the way we treat one another. And in his 2016 peace message, he said this, which I think is most appropriate to our opening session on non-violence. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Pope Francis said, I ask God to help all of us to cultivate non-violence in our most personal thoughts and values. May charity and non-violence govern how we treat each other as individuals within society and in international life. When victims of violence are able to resist the temptation to retaliate, they become the most credible promoters of non-violent peacemaking. In the most local and ordinary situations and in the international order, may non-violence become the hallmark of our decisions, our relationships, and our actions, and indeed of political life in all its forms. All of us want peace. May we dedicate ourselves prayerfully and actively to banishing violence from our hearts, words, and deeds, and to become non-violent people, and to building non-violent communities that care for our common home. Amen. And now I'm going to hand over to Anna. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I think that was a really lovely passage that you chose to start us off with as well. And just say a big thank you to everyone who's organised these meetings, but also for all of you for coming. And I'm really, really looking forward to being able to work with you in these sessions and learning from you as well. What I want to do today is I'll just give a bit of an overview of how the reading group will work and what we'll be doing, and then spend a few minutes just so that we can introduce ourselves and maybe sort of talk about what's brought us here. And then we'll spend the rest of the time thinking about what is non-violence and thinking about the history of non-violence within the church, just to ground us really for moving forwards. So in each meeting, we'll be using the text, but we'll be using it to examine a particular theme. So rather than reading it chapter by chapter, we'll be going thematically. And I'll email sections and page numbers that we'll be focusing on in advance, as well as some discussion questions beforehand, although a big apologies for not doing that today. In each session, I'll give an overview of the topic, and then we'll have some time in our breakout rooms to discuss, and then come back for some group feedback and Q&A. But I'm also happy to adapt this and adjust depending on how we're feeling as a group as we move forwards, if we want more time in a whole group discussion, etc. And you can just let me know in feedback if you want to adapt it to those to have more discussion time. So I think if we just pause here to think about, sorry, just to introduce ourselves, and then I'll give an intro to the text we're looking at. So we just think, just perhaps we could just say our name, where we're from, if you want to say anything about why you are interested in taking part in the reading group or what you're hoping to get out of it. If there's any experiences of non-violence that you've got or any reasons that you're drawn to this, that would be really good to know as well. And I'm going to pick on people in the order that I see them, unfortunately. But I might pick on Marianne first.
Thank you, Anna. I'm Marianne Pallister. I'm the chair of Pax Christi Scotland, and I'm just delighted to see everybody here this evening because it's such an exciting thing to have Anna sharing all of her thoughts on this very special book with us. Thank you. Should I name somebody, or are you going to name somebody, Anna?
Yeah, we can do that if you nominate the next person. I think that's fair.
Okay, I'm going to nominate Father Jim Clark.
Thank you, Mary. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Anna. I'm part of the Pax Christi executive. I'm the chaplain for Pax Christi Scotland, along with Hugh Foy. We formed the chaplaincy team. Obviously very interested in, as a member of Pax Christi, on non-violence, but more than ever, I think we need to deepen not just our understanding of it, but our belief that it's the only way forward. Thank you.
Do you want to nominate the next person?
I'll nominate Rab.
Good evening, I'm Rab Burnett from Edinburgh, member of Pax Christi, a troubled member of Pax Christi as such. I believe non-violence is the way forward, but within myself and my own personal history, I have supported various revolutionary movements that saw no other option but the way of violence. And I'm trying to bring that together within myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Rab. It's a really honest, heartfelt rationale. So thank you for sharing that.
Zoom user, I can't remember your first name again. Sorry. From Dublin, I know.
It's Gareth.
Gareth Sheehan is my name. I'm from Dublin. I've just been interested and looking for kind of groups at the moment that are interested in peace. And it seems to me that there's very little happening in that area in Ireland or in Dublin. And everybody is either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli or, supporting Ukraine. And there isn't anybody, it seems to me, looking for an alternative approach. And that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you so much, Gareth. Would you like to nominate someone?
I'm afraid I don't know anybody. I beg your pardon, my eyesight is very poor. I'll nominate Jill Kent.
Nice, easy name there, right? So my name's Jill. I live in Inverness. I'm originally from the United States, and I currently chair Justice and Peace Scotland, and very interested in peace issues. The issues are so complex, and it's easy to get bogged down and discouraged, and especially at a time the American election just took place, feeling very dispirited about the rhetoric and the lack of dialogue. So really excited to look at examples around the world, and this course is just really appeals to me. I'll nominate Grace.
Why did I know you were going to do that? I'm Grace Buckley. I'm a member of the Justice and Peace Commission nationally, and also a member of Pax Christi Scotland and the Treasurer. I think I'm here because I have a lot of time with the justice of justice and peace, but the peace side of it has always been a problem for me. And at the present time, looking at America, looking at some of the carry-on south of the border, and looking at what's happening in Israel and in Ukraine, I'm finding peace and non-violence very hard. So I'm hoping that somebody can push me in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Grace. Do you want to take your turn to pick someone?
Sorry, Rosalind, I'll pick you.
It's a bit like a Zoom version of tag, isn't it?
Hi, my name's Rosalind. I live in Edinburgh. And like some of the others, belong to Pax Christi and to Justice and Peace in Scotland. I think at the moment I've been doing some studying of theology, and I'm very keen to kind of reflect on the kind of where the gospel non-violence comes from, and to be able to use that when I'm talking to other people, because sometimes I find it quite difficult to talk about non-violence. I feel like I would like more knowledge about scripture to be able to speak more knowledgeably, if that makes sense. Can I nominate Kit?
Hi, okay. Yes, I've always been interested in peace and hoping that peace can be the thing in the world. My name's Kit Fry, by the way. I live in Grantown-on-Spey, near Inverness. But I've always felt that most peace initiatives have come after a period of violence. So my big concern is, does there always have to be violence before we get a peace initiative? And I see there's some examples in the book, but generally speaking, what I see, for example, Northern Ireland followed the Troubles, and I think South Africa too followed a lot of disturbance in South Africa. So I'd like to see peace working as the first thing rather than the thing to mend the violence that's going on. I can't. How do I find out who to nominate? I suppose it's Larrow. Okay, I'll nominate Elizabeth.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth. I live in Glasgow. I'm a poet and I'm a carer for my young daughter. And I have ADHD, all of which means I'm very concerned about language, but I am liable to speak before I think. And especially if you've got access to social media, I'm very much aware of the violence of the language and the struggle of people, especially within arts, to speak clearly about issues that matter without actually behaving as if you want to tear people's faces off. And so that I'm really interested in the use of language and how we speak about peace and how we speak about our issues and how we actually demand the things that we need to demand without causing more injustice and pain and alienation. That's me. Can I nominate, I'm getting to the point where I can't remember who's been.
Jan. Yes.
You're muted.
Right, sorry, I'm on a very old iPad and the touch element of it doesn't always work. So yes, Jan Benvey, I am a member of Pax Christi, but I'm actually also a member of the Scottish Episcopal Church. And actually I'm also secretary of the Anglican Pacifist Fellowship. So into peace in quite a big way. Yeah, just sort of very, I do believe, very strongly believe that as Christians we are called to non-violence. So probably a bit like Rosalind, I want to bone up a bit on my my knowledge about it and whatnot. I actually spent, but over 10 years ago now, but I spent 4 years in the occupied Palestinian territories with it was a group that was then called Christian Peacemaker Teams. It's a Chicago-based organization. It's now called Community Peacemaker Teams. But so I've, to some extent, done some of it on the ground as well. Jim Clark, has he spoken yet? I nominate Jim.
I think Jim has
I have
spoken.
spoken, thanks.
All right, Hugh.
Hi folks, sorry about that. My name's Hugh Foy. I'm a member of the Pax Christi Executive. I have a very similar journey to Rab, and I'm very grateful for him articulating that the way that he did, because, and I won't repeat it, but I think like many people, I come from a place where I've had very much a conversion to the politics and theology of non-violence. My interests are how we can maintain radical change without the recourse to violence, even though when it's portrayed as self-defensive or inevitable. But also I'm very interested in how we mainstream non-violence, how we can take it away from the peripheries of both the church and society and create spaces for education and learning and activism that are rooted in a non-violent gospel understanding of what it means to be human. Thank you. I'll nominate Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Hugh. Hi everyone, my name's Anne-Marie. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. Like various people who've already spoken, I'm invested both in Pax Christi Scotland and in Justice and Peace Scotland. Pax Christi, I'm a voluntary member of the EXCO there, along with other friends and colleagues here, and I work for Justice and Peace Scotland. So a lot of my life is consumed with non-violence and any sort of activism underpinned by my faith, which means a real great deal to me. Like others that spoke, I'm particularly interested in the Holy Land, not just the Holy Land. I've been there a few times, but it's similar to what Rab said about how do we navigate all these areas of injustice in the world without violence, you know. So there are structures of oppression, there are injustices. How do people overcome these things without violence? Particularly as we're all made in God's image and likeness, even those that perpetrate the violence. So as a Catholic, or as a Christian, I should say, it's hard to navigate that, and I don't have an answer. So I'd imagine that's what connects a lot of us here tonight, and certainly why I'm here too. I've forgotten. Now, I had picked someone that I was going to pass on. Is it only Owen that's not, or Andrew? Andrew from
Owen Andrew, I think. Is that right, Marianne?
Yeah. Well, I've met Andrew before, so I'll pass to him. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Yes, I'm Andrew. I'm Chief Executive of Pax Christi England and Wales, as you can see. So I'm a bit of an interloper, but I'm here because it seemed too good an opportunity to miss, and I'm really grateful to Marion and Anna for setting this up. So yeah, before I joined Pax Christi, there'd been a review and a strategic review for Pax Christi England and Wales, and a part of the outcome of that review was that we needed to embed non-violence in everything that we did, so that it was foundational to us. We've been promoting this book as a resource, so thought, although I've read it, it'd be good to come on and hear more about it, and trying to encourage other members from Pax Christi Wales to cross the border and join you in the future. So yeah, that's me, and I will now hand over to Owen.
Oh, Owen, I think you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Hello, I don't really know why I'm here. So when you asked your question, I thought, I don't really know an answer to that, but I'm a retired teacher and I still enjoy doing a lot of reading in terms of history, but also of theology. And it was because I'm kind of still trying to read through a book by Marilyn Robinson, Reading Genesis, that I noticed the advert for this book that is going to be the basis of the discussion. And in the Reading Genesis book, if I picked it up correctly, I've always been aware that the view of the Old Testament is that God is a vengeful, violent character. And yet, sort of Marilyn Robinson goes through Genesis saying that really, sort of that he's not at all God, if it's, sorry for just using the masculine, but that's not the reality at all, that God lives outside of what we humans do to mess up his world. So the second thing was that I do, in a way, suffer from being unjust and so on like that. Many years ago, I was told that that I'm the only one that knows the right way forward, and I suppose that doesn't help my feelings of sort of anger and so on like that I have to live with and control. So I'm looking to see what this passage of meetings is going to help me with. Sorry, I don't think I have to meet. I wouldn't even know where to look.
I think we've done everyone now, have we? Is that? If anyone has, I think everyone's had a chance to speak. If you haven't, then raise your hand and shout at me. Yeah, I think we all have. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for introducing yourselves and for sharing what's brought you here. Really honestly, actually, some really honest reflection. And I think already lots of themes are coming up that I hope we'll be able to explore and discuss. And it draws together quite nicely what we'll be looking at today. So what is non-violence? And I think already we can see various bits of aspects in just what's drawn people here. So it's deepening our theologies. It's a practice. We're looking at ourselves, this interior conversion, looking at the world and asking, how do we respond to particular situations? How do we understand scripture? How do we understand theology? And language as well. I think that's a really good point as well. And I'm sure that you all seem to have a lot of your own experiences and your own expertise, so please feel free to share those too, because I think those would be really rich resources, and I'm sure even if we just had a meeting with each other without the book, we'd still probably get a lot out of it. It sounds like you've got loads to share, which is fantastic. My background, I'll just go over quite quickly. I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself, but my background into nonviolence really began pretty accidentally and academically. So I was studying for my master's at Durham University and went to a talk by Francis Campbell, who was the ambassador to the Holy See at the time, which was on Catholic social teaching, which I had never heard anything about, which is actually quite shocking, I think, looking back, not to have heard anything about it by the time you're 22. And I just became fascinated in it, and someone suggested that I looked at the Catholic worker movement. So I was studying the theology of the Catholic worker movement, and it just really started to click for me and kind of take the gospel to that logical conclusion of putting nonviolence into action. And then I think I had sort of a second conversion experience when I went to live and work in Catholic worker communities and saw that people were actually trying to do this practically, and that we could try and do this as sort of an individual or communal mission. And so that's really sort of what's drawn me to this. And I think since then have sort of been studying and working with various groups in nonviolence too. So the text that we'll be looking at is developed by the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, which is a project of Pax Christi International. And this was launched, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative was launched at the Nonviolence and Just Peace Conference in Rome in April 2016. They've just launched the Catholic Institute of Nonviolence, which will be their research hub. So hopefully we'll see a lot more coming out of that. But the core mission is really mainstreaming nonviolence within the church, and in the hope that this will mainstream nonviolence in the world as well. And it's this text that we're looking at is basically part of this mission of thinking through these questions. The text is a result of 3 years of consultation with activists, organisers, church leaders, social scientists and theologians from across the globe. And really it's trying to explore how can the church return to a tradition of gospel nonviolence. So we're looking at the scriptural, historical and theological roots of nonviolence, but also thinking about the lived experience, where it's being done now in the church, examples of nonviolent practice and where it works, the academic research on why and when nonviolence works, to help us provide all of these foundations really for understanding how this can be mainstreamed in the church. So I want us to focus on what nonviolence is and what we mean by nonviolence, particularly within the Catholic tradition. And mainly we'll be focusing on the preface and appendix 3 from the book in our discussion. But if you haven't got to this or you haven't managed to read anything yet, don't worry, I've got a selection of quotes that we'll be looking at in our groups. So first I just want to give a brief overview of the history and development of nonviolence in the church, which will be a very brief overview, but we will go back into more depth in following sessions of particular areas. Then we'll think a bit about what does nonviolence mean, how does the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative understand nonviolence. We'll reflect on this in our groups a little bit. We'll also touch on the question of why should the church commit to nonviolence and why is nonviolence an appropriate approach, just because I think it's inevitable that we will talk about these questions. But we'll focus more on that next week, but not next week, next month. But this is a question that we will keep reflecting on, we'll continue to discuss, and I think as some people have already raised as well. Okay, so throughout the history of the Catholic Church, just war thinking has really been the dominant stance on churches' views on peace. But early Christianity tended to reflect a pacifist approach. There's a general consensus that pre-Constantine Christians believed they should abstain from military service. And we can see this in the records of early Christians that up until at least 180 AD, there's no records of Christians enlisted in the army. And scholars generally agree this is because it was seen as unchristian. Church fathers such as Origen, Clement of Alexandria condemned the use of violence in Christian military service and really saw this as showing allegiance to the emperor rather than allegiance to God. Even if they still accepted the legitimacy of state power, somehow this was showing participating in the military was sort of not showing true allegiance to God. Latanius drew on the biblical prohibition against murder to also exclude forms deemed legally acceptable, so forms of violence such as war. For earlier thinkers, as Christians weren't in positions of power, there wasn't really a lot of need to expend a lot of effort reflecting on the practicalities of questions of whether Christians should be involved in violence. But as Christians came to exert more influence within society, so after Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire, this is when a plurality of viewpoints really develops. But we still see these early pacifist positions throughout the tradition, and we can see this, for example, within the medieval period. So in Western Europe at the time, during the 10th and 11th centuries, there was the Peace of God and the Truce of God movements. And these tried to limit the use of violence on particular days, particularly feast days or holy days, and also granted immunity for non-combatants, so civilians and clergy. And we see this really starting to take the form of non-violence, though, is in the 20th century. So it's still drawing on this strand of pacifism within the church, but it's through movements like the Catholic Worker, like Pax Christi, that we start to see this renewal in the 20th century. And this is reworked using the language of non-violence. And it's quite important to point out here that the word non-violence, although it has a long history of use in other traditions, is really relatively new in Christianity. But it has been come to see by its advocates as constitutive of the way of Christ. So we could say that although it's a new term in our vocabulary, our Christian vocabulary, it's being used to talk about practice that's been around a lot longer. Comes from the translation of the Sanskrit word ahimsa, which we find used really prominently by Gandhi. And it's not really a negative term, but it's something positive. It's kind of a double negative. So we can see, like other Sanskrit words, or Buddha's use of avera, which means non-hatred. Rather, this isn't something negative, but it literally means love. So ahimsa signifies this idea of comprehensive love in action. So it's non-violence, as in sort of almost the negation or the opposite in a sense, but something positive. What do we do instead of violence? So it's something that shows love in action, but also names what undermines this, so violence, in the same way that we can think about how hatred undermines love. In practice, this means that whilst the non-violent position draws on earlier pacifist understandings within Christianity, it's also slightly different to pacifist approaches in the sense that it's something active. So pacifist would be more sort of refusing to participate in militarism or violence, but non-violence tries to actively dismantle this. And instead, it's really typified by a struggle towards global unity and peace that isn't simply realised through the cessation of violence. So it links non-violence to pacifism, but it moves it further in aiming to form a methodology that actively challenges structures of violence, as well as try and interrupt cycles of violence in which violence begets more violence, and instead build spaces of peace. We'll look at the development of non-violence in papal teaching in later sessions, but we can see that non-violence has been increasingly influential over the last century within the church. And in part, this is contextual. It's due to the influence of peace movements like the civil rights, the influence of Gandhi, but also the changing nature of war. So the advent of world wars, the advent of nuclear weapons, also the changing nature of violence, which is intrastate, involving non-state actors, and a deeper understanding of the intertwined nature of violence. All of these challenge the assumption that war or violence can play a positive role in securing peace. Which we find more within the just war tradition. And they've moved non-violence to a more prominent position within Catholic teaching. So we find, for example, in the 1960s at Vatican II, conscientious objection for the first time ever becomes a valid choice for Catholics to make. Non-violence has been particularly emphasised in the papacy of Pope Francis, again seeking to further mainstream this teaching. And in his 2017 World Day of Peace message, Pope Francis calls on the Church to make active non-violence our way of life and to make non-violence the hallmark of our decisions, our relationships and our actions, and pledges the assistance of the Church in every effort to build peace through active and creative non-violence. But how exactly do we understand non-violence, and specifically Catholic understandings of non-violence? So, as noted, non-violence differs from pacifism, although you will find sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, in that it's not about doing nothing or retreating, but it's rather this active engagement in challenging unjust structures of violence. And that is quite broad, so it could be economic injustice, political, cultural, or even religious violence. Professor Michael Nagler gives us, I think, a really nice definition. He talks about violence as a tendency that pulls us back away from the recognition of unity. And non-violence, on the other hand, pulls us forward towards the recognition of unity. And this is really important in the understanding of violence within non-violence. It's very broad. It's that which destroys unity. And non-violence directs itself to challenge what disrupts unity, change things that threaten unity, but also things that could create or sustain conflict. So really getting down to the root causes as well. And that could be things like unequal access to resources or economic inequality. We can also see within Nagler's definition that non-violence isn't just a static end goal of a peaceful society. So it's not the same as peace, but peace is the aim of non-violence. Peace is the aim of non-violence. And rather, non-violence is this struggle towards global unity and peace, which isn't just realised through a cessation of violence. And Marie Dennis and Ken Buskin from Pax Christi International explain this as non-violence is not simply a stance or an ideal. It is a relentless process of struggle and transformation, resolutely challenges violence without using violence, transforms and resolves conflict, and seeks justice, peace, and reconciliation for all. So we can see here that non-violence is this ongoing method. It's a process of achieving peace, but it also happens at all stages of conflict. So it occurs before conflict, during, and after. And I think it's quite important here to remember that non-violence isn't just about issues of war, but it's really a way to deal with all forms of conflict or try to prevent them. So it's also this form of preventative action to stop conflict from arising in the first place. So we can think about this as if we build more just societies, that takes away some of the issues that would lead to conflict. So it's really a method of trying to build a sustainable culture of peace. And this also means we can see it as a method of governing all relationships. There's a plurality of methods that encompass non-violent practice, but this is based on the premise really that conflict is inevitable, but it isn't inevitable that we have to respond to conflict violently. Familiar examples of practice usually tend to be examples of what's seen as or what's called obstructive practice. So that would be direct confrontation. So things like strikes, protests, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, vigils, and boycotts. But we can also see constructive methods. And the aim here is to promote long-term community building, building alternative non-violent structures. And that could be things like non-violent communication, dialogue, restorative justice, reconciliation, all of which we will discuss later. But really, both of these approaches are important and they have differing uses. So the constructive works alongside to ensure that alternative structures are in place in the case that non-violent resistance works and unjust structures and systems are overturned. So it helps us to break away from reliance on unjust structures. Otherwise, really, this mode of non-violent living can't survive long term. And we can see this again with the example of Gandhi. So what Gandhi does is he tried to set up alternatives to British rule, alternative industries that would be there should or when British rule did fall. So essentially, it means that condemning violence isn't enough. Non-violence isn't just about condemning, but it's how we engage and build alternative practices to show that another way is possible and try to create this other way. So I think already we can see that non-violence is a plural concept. It's an ethical position, a process for use during conflict, a process to prevent conflict, a set of particular methods. Within the Catholic understanding, it's also a form of spirituality, a belief, and a theology. And the preface of Advancing Nonviolence helps us to understand this. So it summarises that nonviolence is a core gospel value. It is essential in transforming violence and injustice. It is a universal ethic and a necessary foundation for a culture of peace. We'll continue to explore. We can see nonviolence is grounded in our faith and our theology. And proponents of nonviolence argue that violence directly contradicts the example of Christ. So we can see this is grounded in an understanding of faithfulness to the gospel. So we can think here about direct obedience to the teachings of Jesus, to turn the other cheek, love your enemies, blessed are the peacemakers, particularly placing a real importance on the Sermon on the Mount. So here we can see part of nonviolence is trying to live this message and mission of Jesus and try to emulate this example. It also links to the sense of solidarity with the whole human family that shares in the new life of Christ. And again, this is based on the premise of recognising the humanity of the other, both the oppressed and the oppressor, and grounded in the human dignity of each person, but also their relationality. So ideas of the common good, solidarity, and this universal membership in the body of Christ in which we all journey together towards God. It also links to how nonviolence can provide an ethic for faithful action. So to act violently is to act out of accordance with our God-given purpose. And again, we find this in the text. Violence is not in accord with our human dignity. So it's not that it just violates the other person's dignity when they're harmed, but it also violates the dignity of the person who's doing the violence because they're acting in a way that they're not designed for. So this means that we're called to engage in the world in a different way. Non-violence functions as a strategy to try and do this, to try and live faithfully. And I think this helps us to understand why the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative describes active nonviolence as a spirituality and a way of life. We can also see nonviolence here as a mode of Christian witness. So Christians as being called to live according to the laws of the kingdom rather than the laws of the world. And Lisa Saul-Cahill notes here that such a mode of practice goes beyond addressing issues of conflict or promoting theories for achieving peace, but rather it's a way of life. So it's different to approaches such as just war theory, which deal with conflict or what to do during conflict. But nonviolence is really about how we live day to day. So it's about our relationships that are personal, interpersonal, communal, societal, global. And that means it's a personal conversion, so confronting the violence with our own hearts, and this is really where non-violent practice starts, and trying to live more in line with the gospel values, the ethics of non-violence, but it's also part of the church's unique message and witness to the world. So I know that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour to introduce you to some of the concepts and parts of non-violence, and we will continue to explore this and deepen our understanding over the course, drawing out these multiple dimensions of non-violence. But I think we can see that it's a theology, a spirituality, it's how we understand scripture, the way of Jesus, the gospel values, this reverence for human life and dignity, a way of living, both within community, but also for those outside our community, ways of challenging injustice, a set of strategies and methods, and a form of witness. And all of these angles are really drawn out within the text Advancing Nonviolence. So what I want to do now is just pause and just really for us to be able to talk together in our groups and think about what our understandings of nonviolence are. Perhaps if we have experience of nonviolence that we want to share or anything that's shaped our understandings. And also provided a list of quotations from the text that you can use in your reflections, which hopefully you should have all emailed to you. So I'll put us into breakout rooms, I think for about 15 minutes. I'll come around the rooms just to check that everyone's doing okay, but if you're getting really stuck, then just shout out and I can come and come into your group and help you. Has anyone got any questions before we move into breakout rooms? No. Marianne, yeah.
And could I just say that I did email all of the questions just before we went on air tonight, but they're also in the chat.
Perfect.
So that should be helpful if people can see them in the chat.
That's great, excellent. If anyone's having any trouble getting hold of those, then just let me know. But the quotation should also be on your the email attachments as well. Okay, I will open the breakout rooms now then. Kits, have you got? Oh, he's gone. Don't know if it's added you to a breakout room, Marianne, but I don't know. Do you want to just join one?
I would be
Or are
happy
you
to.
happy?
I'm happy to join one if there's a shortage anywhere.
I think rooms 3, they've only got 3, so maybe that might be. But also, if you want to just, that's also fine too.
No, I'll go to room 3 if that's
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect.
I'm not being told to go anywhere.
I think you might have. Can you, if you click on the breakout rooms? I think because we're co-hosts, it hasn't added us. I think you might have to join manually.
So will I join 3?
Yeah, I think that's got the least people in.
Okay, right. I'm going.
Okay, that's easy. Okay, so I think we were back from our breakout rooms. I'm a bit sad to close the breakout rooms actually, because every single one was having a fascinating discussion and they were all totally different. So I think maybe if we just go around to each room, if there's a spokesperson who wants to just give us a bit of a flavour of what you were discussing, and then we can have a bit of time for sort of more general discussion and Q&A. So if we start with room 1, what were the kind of themes that were coming up for you? So that was Elizabeth, Jim and Kit.
Well, I know that we were kind of talk. Well, I certainly was talking there just at the end about how looking at, you know, it's easy to condemn violence when it's out there, but how it's difficult to be, you know, self-critiquing violence, you know, in your own life, be it culturally or even formatively. How you talk to people, you know, the attitudes that you adopt with people, the passive aggression, you know, things that yeah, you're not hitting people, you're not killing people, but there's still an element of violence to them. And we'll be talking about how some of that is how you were brought up, you know, and how, you know, you were formed as a child, and even within your education. We're talking about how for many of us, you know, getting the cane or getting the belt at school was acceptable. I was at junior seminary and used to get belted by priests, you know. It's like when that was acceptable, and somehow, you know, it kind of goes into your psyche a bit, you know, that the power thing, it's acceptable to use violence, you know, to maintain that or whatever. So there was a lot of, I felt a lot of, you know, self-reflection in it all, without even getting into, you know, what's happening nationally or globally.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that's a really, really good point. And that sort of personal reflection of non-violence, I think, is really important. And essentially, I think that's really where non-violence starts, is thinking about ourselves, which I think is really challenging. I mean, there's even colleagues at the Catholic Non-Violence Initiative have said they struggled with calling themselves non-violent because they're aware of, you know, participation in things and systems, and that's really hard to do. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that anyone from Group 1 would like to share?
Well, I think we were also talking about the fascination with violence and with things that we watch on television and things that we put in stories and video games and things of that sort. There seems to be some fascination, some appeal. We're looking for violence to give us something.
Yeah, but also the church itself, you know, the violence in the church. Apart from the early church, we saw a lot of later violence, and that also extends into the politicians we see today, that some of them pursue policies of violence, even though they're Catholics, and don't seem to be following the word of the Pope at all.
Yeah, so I think it sounds like you're thinking about all of these sort of cultural structures, or the way that culture ingrains violence, perhaps, including in religion. And I suppose it's sort of non-violence is this process of unpicking, perhaps, what we've been told or what we're surrounded by. Yeah, thank you. How about Group 2? That was Andrew, Anne-Marie, Grace and Jan.
Who's going to dive in? We went straight into a difficult problem, which Grace raised around if you're speaking with people who are from Ukraine at the moment, what does non-violence mean for them when they're desperate to defend themselves against destruction? How does non-violence play out there? So unless the others disagree, I don't think we came up with a solution to that. Jan raised this as we were finishing, raised a interesting question about, as we seek to understand non-violence, we ought to try and understand what we mean by violence as well. So come at it from that way, what violence is. So
yeah, because we were speaking, as I think it was Elizabeth saying there, about all the different, or maybe it was Kit, sorry, all the different forms of violence that there are. And I don't know if anybody come across Walter Wink, who wrote a lot about non-violence, and he spoke about, and it's just a phrase that's always stuck with me, the myth of redemptive violence. And there is this myth that somehow or other, violence will be redemptive, but I don't think it is. And I think that is another thing as well, when people say, oh, but non-violence won't work. I'm always tempted to say to them, so violence has. And I mean, even in Ukraine, I mean, what, 2 years later, how many dead?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I think that's a really important point about that understanding of cycles of violence. And I think, as you were saying, Andrew, there's some very challenging questions about how do we think about, I suppose, how others practice. And I think, at least for me, I think again that comes back to the personal and that kind of what you're committed to. And I think non-violence is, I think I sort of said this in your group, but I think for me non-violence is less about condemning, but thinking about how do we do things differently. And someone asked me this at a talk, actually, they were, oh, how do you talk to Putin and how do you talk to but I think it's really about, it's building a more attractive alternative essentially, that I think is that's more appealing and that works. And so rather than trying to sort of condemn, it's sort of how, I suppose, thinking creatively, how can we do things differently? Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. That's some really important points. Then room 3, we've got Jill, Owen, and Rosalind.
I guess I can start, but others please add in. One of the things that struck myself, and I think Rosalind also referred to it, it was just talking about building up our own skills and our own framework, so that when we have opportunities to dialogue, and it just about it being the active participation, to try to not be overwhelmed by situations, but to kind of build up our skills, our knowledge of, gospel quotes and whatnot, to be able to find a place where people can, we can in our own, challenge people if they say things, we're around and that we don't agree with, or that might be in a different way, and finding ways, kind of having a framework to discuss things where people don't agree, finding ways to have that dialogue, and to find in our own lives ways that we can question people without creating more violence, but just say from a different perspective, or the way I see it, or I don't agree with you on that. And we thought that was maybe something we were interested in.
The training and formation in non-violence, so it's something that we need to practice and learn how to do, and that we can't expect people to respond in a particular way without having those skills. And I think that I know in lots of the groups people were talking about language and dialogue, and that seems to be something that people are really concerned about, especially on social media, and that the violence of language, which I think maybe we can spend a bit of time talking about that in one of the sessions too, because I think again, when you're surrounded by that and you're in, I know just going on Twitter or X, or it seems everyone seems violent and everyone seems angry, and it can be a really dark place to be. So how do we build those skills where we actually can, and I think it is building skills of having proper communication and proper dialogue. Is there anything else from anyone in group 3 that you'd like to share?
I think just there's the idea of language itself. I mentioned that I've become very, very aware of individual words that we use without even thinking, which are actually quite violent words. And there's no need for those words if we can just be aware of them, be conscious of them. But that's because we grow up with them and they're just there in the back of our heads. They come out and we don't mean anything violent by them, but they add to the violence of our conversations. And I think that that's a very difficult thing that we've got to be very aware of. It's not something that comes naturally. We've got to think about it.
But is there a question too of calling out the violent language of others, such as our politicians, who add to the overall violence? This is what was in our group we talked about, naming politics as violence, and a lot of the language used by politicians, both here and in America, has been extremely violent and encouraged violence, and is part of developing non-violence to call out language like that.
I think we also have to call out, I have a background in media, and I think that we have to call out those who are writing headlines. It's not the reports that are there, it's the headlines which cause the damage. And of course, sometimes it's those politicians that Grace is mentioning that use a phrase that is obviously going to be picked up by the sub-editors that make this fantastic headline, which is hugely violent and is hugely influential. I mean, we saw that with refugees and so on, and I think that that is particularly something that we are able to speak to the media about and say, no, that's not, we don't want that. It's not necessary.
And I think actually also the disinformation as well is a huge thing, which is really, and can be incredibly divisive as well. I'm thinking that we might have to have a session on nonviolent communication now as well, and add that into our agenda. What were people's feeling about how, if we can concisely, how would we describe nonviolence? And is there anything that you would add to some of the descriptions that we've been thinking about, or anything you think is missed? I think language seems to be a really big one that we want to pick up on. But is there anything else that people would add, or questions, or bits you would want to take away?
I think one that was mentioned in our group was, we noticed that there was a comment about what was being done in the Amazon, but there was a whole issue of violence to our world, to non-human creatures. That's part of which got us into the whole discussion about what is violence and what are we looking at it from.
Yeah, and I think within sort of this framework of or the Catholic framework of non-violence, violence is very broad. It really is things that harm, language, it harms human dignity, but also what harms creation. It's really all of these forms of harm really, I think, take dignity away, and that can be very plural, which again makes sort of all-encompassing project as well.
I wondered whether the conversations and the spirit promoted by the Synod is possibly the most engaging thing regarding a non-violent atmosphere. I found it really hard to imagine sitting down with people whom I know are fundamentally wrong and being able to engage in a conversation in the spirit with them, but thinking that is the only way forward.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, Rab. And I can send you a whole PowerPoint slide on that PowerPoint if you want to.
Yes, please.
Okay, I can send that to you. But I think that is a really good model of doing nonviolent communication. Absolutely, really good example.
Can I just sort of add to that, having experienced that, that there's, when we talk about communication, it isn't just about talking, it's about other things, but it's also about listening. And that's probably something that we all need to do a bit more of, and be a bit better at.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for, we're not just in a conversation to get our point across, we're actually genuinely trying to engage with the other person, which I think social media is a really bad example of that. I think it's whose voice is louder, I think, isn't it, sometimes? Anything else that people want to draw up on sort of the definitions, understandings of non-violence? Or bits that really speak to them?
Did we say that we'd spoken about that you need, sometimes we need to identify what we mean by violence before we can understand non-violence?
Do you have any summaries in your group of what you thought that would be?
No, I think we came to that literally as the 59-second warning was coming that we were about to be taken out. But yeah.
Is there anyone in the other group who has thoughts about this? What do we think violence is?
I think these are thoughts for the months ahead, and I think that we've got to the stage where we would like Anna to sum up what we've experienced this evening, and it's been a fascinating evening. I think I hope that other people think that as well. But Anna, can you just give us a few closing remarks, and then we'll have a prayer before we go.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Marianne. And I think thank you so much for everything that everyone has raised, and we will, as Marianne says, we will keep exploring these issues and digging in a bit deeper. And I think it's really interesting hearing all of your insights and all of your thoughts, and that's what I'm really enjoying about this process. So thank you very much for sharing. Next time we're going to think a little bit about why non-violence. So why is this anti-non-violence happening within the church? Why might we want to turn to non-violence? And I will send out a series of page numbers that we will be looking at, a set of questions as well. If anyone's got any problems accessing the text, etc., then just let me know. And I will hand over to Marianne to finish.
Well, thank you so much. All of the information will be on our website. It will also come to you via email. I think I've got everybody's email at the moment. So that's good. I'll just send stuff out as Anna gives it to me. Thank you all so much for signing up. I hope that we'll have lots more sessions like this. And thank you so much to Anna for really introducing this fantastic book. I hope everybody's got the book. I was saying to Anna that, you know, I hate putting Amazon, giving them a plug, but they do have the Kindle version, and that's half the price of the book. So, you know, let's not be prissy about this, and and if you want the Kindle version, go for it. And it also the hard words are also easy to access there as well. So do have that and let us know how you're getting on with the book, and we'll see you the next time. But I would like to, I'm going to give another plug now for Pax Christi Scotland. We have a new prayer card. Please let me know if you would like some for your parish or for your personal use. And I'm going to finish this evening with the prayer on our new prayer card. And I hope that it kind of sums up what we've been talking about this evening. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Father in heaven, you see every injustice, every violent act, every contravention of peace. We seek your guidance as we turn to our earthly leaders, hoping to change hearts, convince minds, and empower them to bring peace to the innocent. We pray that you will comfort the wounded, the bereaved, the disinherited. Lord, help us to make our common home a haven of non-violence. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you all so much. We will see you the next time. I'm going to stop